Hi, everybody, and welcome to our cyber insurance webinar series. I have with me James Ingram from Arch Insurance UK. He is a cybersecurity risk engineer, and he will explain to you what that is so you understand the context of our conversations today. This is a several-part webinar series, so we hope that you learn a little bit or a lot from what we're going to talk about today and in our future sessions. And with that, James, why don't you give the audience a little breakdown of what a cybersecurity risk engineer is, and we'll go on from there.
It is a jack of all, is what it is. I think cyber insurers over the past few years have realised that the cyber industry, from a technical standpoint, is really quite complex from their understanding, and it's very different from insurance in general. So they started hiring people like me with a cyber insurance background to sit in with underwriters and help analyse some of the more complex sides of the technical risk. So that's my job. I will help them when we have accounts come through our desk. I will help them to underwrite and help them assess the risk.
Excellent. And so I'm sure we'll get into that a little more detail as we answer some of these questions, so myself and the audience can really kind of see how someone like you comes into play when someone is looking for insurance. So with that, let's hit off with the first question. The reason we're doing this today is because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around cyber insurance and what an insurance company looks for, how a company should go about this, things that a company should look for in their cyber insurance policy, and a whole slew of other things that come into play. So first and foremost, what are the primary benefits of cyber insurance for businesses, and how does it actually differ from traditional insurance policies that businesses might typically get?
I suppose the primary benefit of the insurance is you're transferring the financial risk associated with a cyber attack. So you're transferring the risk across to the insurer. The idea of the insurance in general is to be able to recover any losses that basically recover the company back to the state as if the incident never happened, up to the policy limit. Obviously, if it's gone past that, then it's not like they can't go any further than that, but it's to recover that company back to if the incident never happened or prior to the incident, essentially. That could be kind of loss of funds whilst you're experiencing a cyber attack, or that could be any regulatory fines or anything. I'm sure we'll come on to some of the coverages later. How it differs from other policies is cyber insurance is quite a complex form of insurance in that the way it triggers and how it reacts to an event is slightly different from other insurance lines. I suppose the first thing is it triggers by a malicious event in the network in general. That's in a system, and but it's not just an indemnification policy. It's not just a policy where you submit a claim, they assess it and pay it. There's a service element involved in a cyber insurance policy as well. So they have the incident response help, they have the litigation help, and one of the big differences with the cyber insurance policy is it's first and third party. Quite often with other insurance lines, it's one or the other in general, not always, but mostly one or the other, whereas cyber insurance normally will cover first and third party losses.
Does an insured have to opt? I might not ask this question the right way. Is it both first and third when you buy the policy, or you as the organization say, I only want first party, or I want third party, or I want both?
In general, because of the intertwinedness, for want of a better term, normally the policy will offer both. I'm sure there are probably policies you can ask for but then you get one or the other, or there might be blended policies with other lines of business potentially that only offer one. But in general, a cyber insurance policy will cover both. Okay.
Is that true of most carriers out there? And I guess the reason I'm asking this is I don't know if it's probably somewhere in the rest of these questions I have to ask you, but is there, if I'm an insured looking for a policy, should I be wary if I see the opportunity or or an insurer who is willing to underwrite my organization, and it's only like first party coverage or third party coverage? Is that kind of like a big red flag for me as the one procuring the policy if it doesn't automatically have both?
If you did see that, I would, and it's entirely feasible, but if you did see that, I would have a really good think about your own exposure and say, do I have, say it doesn't offer third party, do I have any third party exposure? The answer is probably going to be yes, in which case you probably are going to want a policy that's going to cover your third party exposure as well. And to be honest with you, if you didn't have much third party exposure or much first party exposure, say you didn't rely on your IT systems that much, so you could go down for a bit and actually your first party losses wasn't going to be that high.
Yeah.
That's the underwriter writing that account is probably going to take that into account anyway when they're dealing with the pricing. So they're not just going to give you the same price as if you had a super high exposure to first party as well. So there's probably not a lot of benefit of just clearing it off the policy anyway.
Okay. You brought up further things while you were kind of laying out all that with question number one, and it's kind of like a side question, and it's only because I've heard it come up more and more from some other organizations out there who have cyber insurance, and the question has come up, or maybe the misconception of when our systems are being restored. I think some organizations have that expectation that with their cyber insurance policy, it's meant to help them better what they had in place so the same thing doesn't happen again. So I just want to make that clear for everybody on the call that cyber insurance is not there to help better your systems. It's, as James said, to help you recover back to your original state of business. And then what you do after that is on the company. The third question, I guess, to that is, you mentioned that cyber insurance has service elements to it, and you mentioned incident response. I bring this up because it happened on our side of the equation with a customer that we work with, who had made mention of they weren't interested in an MDR service, right? Or Service One Complete service, which has an IR component to it, because they had IR from their insurance company. So my response to that is, you don't want to have to use the incident response that your insurance company offers you, because that means something really bad happened. So what would you agree with me on that sentiment, or do you have a different opinion?
I agree to most of that extent. I couldn't agree more in a lot of it. Most insurance policies are going to have a retention or a deductible. So if you, before, say, your policy or trigger, you've already had to have had $250,000 worth of losses or something along those lines, in which case you've already lost that before your insurance policy triggers. Whereas if you had a service in place that's going to react straight away, you're going to mitigate those losses. And also, not every incident you're going to have is going to be to the point where you want to be claiming on your cyber insurance. It's a bit like your car insurance. Sometimes you have a little dent or a dent here and there. You don't want to be claiming on your car insurance every single time. You want someone who's just going to look after that car, and that's kind of what an MDR service will help you do. So I think there is definitely, there's a crossover in them, but they need to be kind of seen as separate entities.
Okay, cool. So I think all of that kind of actually leads into question number two, which are, what are some of the common misconceptions about cyber insurance, and how can businesses ensure they have the right coverage for their specific needs? So I think we just kind of hit it off with part of that IR question versus MDR, and then clarifying third party and first party risks as well. I'm glad that you mentioned something about the deductible, like how much they have to lose, because that was not even something that I was thinking about, but it makes sense. If I have to do that with my car, then why wouldn't I have to do it with my cyber insurance policy? But are there other misconceptions out there, outside of like the betterment of your security infrastructure, and when you want to engage IR services that come into play with cyber insurance that we could maybe clarify for the audience today.
I think with any complex insurance coverage, there's always going to be misconceptions about it. And I think that the most common one with cyber that we see so often is we don't need cyber insurance, or we're not big enough to need it, or we don't rely on our IT enough to need cyber insurance. That very well might be the case, but a vast majority of the time it's not the case. And I'm not trying to do a sales pitch here, because it's not for me. But I think if companies went and had a really good hard look at their systems and thought, if none of this worked for 10, 15, 20 days, which is very, very typical what we see in a major cybersecurity event, what would be the impact to my business? And then on top of that, have a look at their data and say, I've got a lot of data here. They might not do much of IT, but they might store a lot of records, like private personal records, health records, wherever it might be. That leaves them exposed on a regulatory side and on a legal basis. So suddenly, if you had a hard look at yourself, you might say, actually, maybe I do need cyber insurance. That's probably the first misconception, the basic one. I think the other one is a mistrust of insurers in general, but cyber insurance for this conversation, that they don't want to pay, and they will do everything they can to get out of paying, and they will use the information you give them to get out of paying. That is, and I know anyone listening to this is going to go, well, of course you'd say that, but it is genuinely true. Your settlement and your claim is an insurer's product, right? And if mistrust is developed in that product, i.e., you don't pay out a few times, you don't have a product anymore because no one buys it. So it's insurers in general want to pay. Obviously, the claim's got to be valid, but in general, they're not happy to pay. Obviously, no one's happy to lose millions of dollars, but they want to pay, and they want to give that client the best service possible because that's their product.
Okay.
I think the last one is that all cyber insurance coverages are the same, and they're really not. Cyber is probably one of the lines of insurance where you very rarely see two policies the same, and every policy has subtle differences in the coverage. So it's just really, even like the wording and the subtle wording in it might slightly change whether an event is covered or not. So it's just use your legal services, use your broker, even talk to the insurer themselves, but see what that coverage is, I would say.
Do you think in that scenario, like having a breach coach or a lawyer that specializes in cybersecurity law would be a good addition to helping an organization review their insurance policy to, I guess, understand the fine print and the ins and outs of the legalese that's in there?
Absolutely. So if you have any contacts as breach coaches, they will have seen it from the other side. They would have had to deal with these incidents and then looked at what the policy covers. So they will see it from that side. And then they will also, a lot of them will have a coverage counsel element to their practice. And the coverage counsel's entire role is to look at wording and decide whether an event is covered or not. They are very, very experienced in being able to take apart a wording and say whether it's suitable for that company or not.
Okay.
So yeah, lean on them.
Okay, excellent. So now that we've gone through that, let's talk about brokers for a second. How do brokers fit into this entire equation when it comes to cyber insurance? Because as far as I know, unless you're an insurtech, carriers aren't working directly with the customer. It's all going through the broker.
In general, even the smaller insurtechs and that will have a broker element to them because there's a legal requirement there in terms of, because you are front of house, so you're selling that insurance. So you've got firstly you need the licenses to be able to sell insurance in that country and in that jurisdiction. But at the same time, you've got a duty of care to that client to say that you are selling them a policy that is suitable for them. So that's kind of where the broker comes in. They're kind of front of house. And they act as intermediaries between the client and us as the insurers. their job is to kind of help determine what the client's needs are, the coverage they require, listen to them, and then help them find a suitable policy to fit that requirement and provide the best possible policy. It's not just on price, but on the coverage and everything else that goes around it. And they do a good job at that most of the time.
Are brokers typically the ones that will run additional assessments on the insured to understand what other gaps or vulnerabilities they might have in their insurance environment, or does that request come from the insurance carrier?
A bit of both.
Okay.
When you first engage a broker, they might run some of these assessments and risk assessments, and then like kind of external vulnerability scans and everything else they run to try and help develop a picture of whether they're firstly going to be suitable for cyber insurance, any gaps they're going to be, anything they can help adjust prior to going to get insurance, trying to get them the best possible policy. But at the same time, once they kind of approach carriers, especially if you have a relationship with one, say you've been with Arch for a number of years, Arch also might be helping you do this. They might be in talking to you and saying, actually, we've run some scans, or these are risk assessments we've come up with. Maybe if you did this, it would help you with X and Y. So it's a bit of both, but normally the broker's in the first instance.
Okay. And in that scenario, I guess I would maybe add, because I know we talk about this, I think, in future sessions, but it comes back to how you're filling out the insurance application and the types of information you're sharing. And as you guys will hear in later sessions, James constantly will tell you to share more information and utilize the comment sections of the insurance applications. So if you're a trend customer, which I'm assuming all of you are who are watching this, we're building reports within our Vision One console, specifically other cyber insurance reports that you all will be able to use to hopefully tell that story better on what your environment looks like. And that's to essentially make this process a little bit easier for you all. So just know that those are on the way if they're not already there. And if you have questions, you can definitely reach out to myself or Vince Kearns, and we're more than happy to help you. So let's move on to the next question. And I'm asking you this question because it's come up a lot on our side of the equation. And I want to get as clear of an answer as I can on this, because there seems to be a lot of this happening more often than not lately. But what should a business do if their broker or carrier, and I'm probably going to lean more towards broker, tells them the security solution they have in place is not on their preferred security vendor list? What would you say to that?
If I was being flippant, I would say, what qualifies you to say that to me is what I would say to my broker. But I think that the first thing I would say to them is, okay, give me a technical detail, provide me technical details to why that is the case. You tell me in detail. And if they've made this decision, if they're saying this, they should be able to provide that.
Okay.
And if they can't, I would be questioning why they're saying it then. This should be an incredibly rare thing. For a start, brokers aren't the one providing the cover. They're not the ones who are taking the risk. It's the insurer taking the risk. So it's the underwriter that's deciding on whether all the solutions in place in general across the entire cybersecurity suite of controls is suitable to provide coverage and for what premium.
Okay.
A broker has to put those in touch with it, and collect those. And sometimes a broker might say, oh, your big gap here missing, we'd probably struggle to get some carriers on board unless you fill that gap. But in terms of different solutions playing off against each other, that's not really something we should see very often at all.
Okay. And for those of you watching too, I have had other conversations with other carriers, and they've essentially said the same sentiment as James has. So there are a couple that I can think of that do probably have that requirement. Chubb and Beasley come to mind, but majority of other carriers don't really care which security solution you have in place. They just want to know that it does certain things. And so again, that's where the point comes in to just share as much as you can. And James brought up a really good point of being able to, pointedly asking your broker, okay, what technical aspect of it do I need to have, and being able to showcase that with Trend Vision One, and literally hand them a report or walk them through, all of the capabilities that it offers you. And if that doesn't work, I'm here as a resource. Vince Kearns is here as a resource to help you guys with those conversations. So I'm going to hop on to another subject, and I'm only bringing this up because it's talked about a lot in our industry, right? And I know you and I have talked about it a little bit, but zero trust comes up a lot. And in our industry, and with how we build our product and what organizations are looking to achieve. But does zero trust really have a place in the cyber insurance world?
Absolutely. Zero trust is something that we look for everyone to be aspiring towards. It's one of those things that realistically no one will ever achieve true.
Right.
Kind of that end goal. It's like that it's an aspiration that everyone should be aiming for and moving towards at all times. But yeah, zero trust in general is the way that I think the entire cybersecurity architecture should be moving to, because trust is inherently dangerous in systems where if someone was to gain that trust maliciously, then keys to the kingdom type problems. So yeah, absolutely, I support zero trust.
Okay, thank you. So what other factors should businesses consider when determining the appropriate level of cyber insurance coverage for their organization? I know we talked about the whole first party, third party risk, but what else comes into play?
So the appropriate level of coverage, that's a really key point when finding this out, because this isn't a cheap policy that they're going to be buying normally, and they really need to make sure they're getting the right coverage. I think the first thing to do is do like an impact analysis on your systems and your company, but be realistic. I think people think, a cyber attack, oh, that'll have me down for a few hours. Oh, what's a few hours? It's just not. It never is, and it never will be. It's days, if not weeks, of interruption and problems. And then identify where your exposure is as well, and think, all right, am I heavily first party focused? Is I heavy BI, business interruption, affected if my systems went down, or is it more the fact that I've just got loads of data and I'm going to be hit by regulatory issues and lawsuits and things? So find out what your exposure is, and then top that up and think, all right, what coverage and what amount of premium, what amount of limit am I going to need to buy? Also consider fines and penalties, and look at the jurisdiction that you're currently in and think, all right, what am I exposed to? And at that point as well, on the last point of it is think about the level of support you want in an incident. Most cyber insurance policies will provide that incident response help, but some are far more interactive with that and really hand-holding, for want of a better term, when something does go wrong, and others are kind of just, they stand back and say, here if you need it. And it's where you want that. So when you're thinking about kind of your coverage and your policy and what you want for your organization, again, talk to your broker, talk to your carriers, see what they offer.
Okay. Do you think that that's also like a good point to like advise or, with a breach coach or a lawyer that specializes in cybersecurity, and maybe I'm thinking of it in terms of all those regulatory fines and things that you mentioned, like that lawyer breach coach is going to know that stuff, and so if they look at your policy, they'll be able to tell, oh, you don't have enough coverage if this happens because of all of these regulatory fines, et cetera, that would ensue should event A happen or what.
Absolutely. They are really good resources to use and abuse. They are brilliant. And I think what they'd be really good at is identifying issues they've had and incidents they've dealt with very similar companies to yours. So they'll be able to say, companies A, B, and C, all very similar to yours. This is the outcome. This is the amount of money they lost. This is the amount of downtime. This is the impact of their business. What they're very good at doing, they don't make anything out of this because they've experienced it,
Right.
and that they've been in the thick of it, orchestrating the issues. They're quite good at scaremongering board members and directors and those things into helping you to support what you're trying to say to them, and say, I need a cyber insurance. I need more money for my cyber system or my cybersecurity systems. I need an extra module, wherever it might be. They're very. I think when board members hear a lawyer telling them about this stuff, they tend to listen.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point to mention, because that comes up quite a bit where, we hear from some of our customers who even CISOs who are like, I need to get my board to understand. And so being able to leverage or utilize a breach coach in that capacity to provide you that information and things that they've already lived through with other organizations of your same size or within your same industry, they can really help bring that to the forefront and provide you the information you need to give to your board to help them see the bigger picture and the impact of a potential event. And it's always not a if, it's a when. So let's just make that clear, right? It's never an if, it's a when. And so let's kind of like lean into our next question, which, and I don't know how well you'll be able to get into this, but what are some of the typical exclusions or limitations in a cyber insurance policy that businesses should be aware of? I think maybe the biggest one that comes to mind for me is nation state, and kind of how the lines get drawn between that. Outside of that, I can't think of any others, but that's the biggest one that I can think of.
I'll touch that nation state and kind of war very quickly, because we can talk for hours on it and people will be screaming at me somewhere. But in general, there are exclusions when you can prove there is a nation state element to it, and there are different types of war exclusions. I think the best thing to do is just discuss what is covered and what isn't covered in a war exclusion with your broker. That's probably the easiest way of doing it in your policy, because as everyone probably listening to this knows, be able to define that a nation state has conducted an attack is extremely difficult. So it's at what point are they defining it? At what point are we saying this is definitely a nation state attack? Normally that's based on this scale, which it's not something we've ever seen before historically. So it's almost unprecedented. But yeah, before I go down rabbit hole down through war, I will talk about a couple of other exclusions. So I said before, cyber insurance policies are complex and they're never really the same for a lot of things. So typical exclusions, there aren't many typical exclusions, but some of them will be, the most obvious one for me is kind of physical injury and death that comes out. That's excluded. So if some sort of attack led to, I don't know, a fire or something along those lines, or maybe a safety system went down, that element wouldn't be covered. And alongside that, property damage. Property damage is its own class. Sometimes you can buy that alongside your cyber policy, but in general, property damage isn't covered. So if I was managed to attack like an OT systems fire suppressant system or something, and turn it on, and I soak a data center, that would, all those machines and everything wouldn't be covered. IP, intellectual property theft, normally isn't covered. Again, that's normally a separate policy or an add-on to a cyber policy. Rep harm, reputational harm, that can normally be included pretty easily, but in general, it's excluded unless asked for. So think about that. Again, it's quite hard to define, but I suppose the obvious one, ransom payments to sanctioned entities. They normally do cover ransom payments, and that's a common misconception that they don't. Some policies don't, but most do. It depends on the jurisdiction you're talking about. In the US, they do. However, they don't cover them for sanctioned entities. So if you choose to make a payment, which you shouldn't be legally, to a sanctioned entity, the insurance doesn't cover it.
Okay. Perfect. All right, so let's get on to the big question. Well, I think the last two are probably the biggest two. How does cyber insurance help mitigate financial losses in the event of a data breach or cyber attack?
So I said before that it's there to restore the company back to its original point, or the point it would be having not had the cyber attack at that point in time. So I suppose mitigate financial losses, it's the fact that the first thing that's going to happen is your business interruption. So during that period, whatever it might be, your revenue generation is going to be affected in some way, some level. So they will, alongside the insured, calculate the revenue lost over that period of time and then recompense them for that. Extortion, so mitigate financial losses. I think sometimes some of these ransom payments are very extreme and can really hurt a company. So again, it will protect you against that. Forensics and recovery, that's probably one that's forgotten about in terms of when people are thinking about how much coverage they need and what protections they need. And that it's amazing how quickly forensics and recovery, legal costs and everything else, once you top them up after a major incident, can add up. And suddenly you're into the kind of couple of $1 million and you haven't actually dealt with the fact that you've lost money or you've now got to deal with regulatory fines or anything anymore. So that's covered.
Okay.
And then you've got court damages, fines, legal fees, penalties, notification to customers, credit monitoring for the customers that you've had their data stolen, public relations. There are so many elements that once you add them together, you think, wow, I really am exposed. And these are all the financial losses that cyber insurance will help mitigate.
All right, so let's move on to our last question. And I think this is probably, in my eyes, like the biggest question. I don't know if there's a lot of companies out there who actually think this way, but I wanted to ask the question either way, so we can get your response and kind of how carriers kind of view all of this. So should a company solely rely on cyber insurance as a part of its incident response or risk mitigation strategy?
No, there you go. There's a danger, and I imagine CISOs suffer this all the time, in which they're asking for additional resources and their risk managers and boards say, no, sure, we've transferred that risk to an insurer. But there's only so much risk you can transfer to an insurer, so it needs to happen together. And at the same time, insurance standards are going to increase. So unless you improve your standards alongside them, eventually you probably won't qualify anymore. So it's just about improving with them. No one wants to have a cyber attack, and if you can avoid it happening in the first place, you never have to claim on the insurance. That's much better than having it and then having to deal with the fallout. And the truth of the matter is, however much you get back financially, you probably will never fully recover from a really big cyber attack in terms of your people's perception, what's happened inside the company, even the stress and the strain that it puts the people through that have had to deal with that for the few weeks and respond to it. If you can stop it from happening in the first place, or when it does happen, you can mitigate the severity, you can reduce the severity of it with great cybersecurity tooling and posture, then that's much better alongside a cybersecurity policy.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, on the IR side, you should still have all the correct responses in place. You should still have everything you need to respond to an incident, but your cyber insurance can become part of that response. You can write it in. You actually write your cyber insurance into your incident response strategy and your processes and plans, and they can work in situ together. So that's a bit more combined. You can rely on them a little bit, but not for risk mitigation.
Okay. And I think that's a really great point to highlight. that you can write your cyber insurance policy into your incident response plan. It's a great opportunity for you to engage with a breach coach or a lawyer who specializes in cybersecurity law to help you test those incident response plans and help you craft it the way that it needs to be crafted for your business, so you don't forget anything. And you'll probably hear us talk about this in future sessions, but those incident response plans are a key role in helping companies recover faster with less downtime. And I just saw an IBM report that talked about, I think organizations recover, I want to say 54% faster when they've got incident response plans that are active and have been tested. So it's just something for you to think about. And tied into that is also from a payout perspective, or how much a company has to spend to recover from an attack. That also decreases with those higher level incident response plans that have been more actively tested and run on a regular basis. So James, any other takeaways you would like to leave with our audience today before we say goodbye?
I think from today, it's speak to your broker and really think about the coverage in your policy. Talk to them if you're not comfortable, if you're being under or oversold. And if you are struggling with your broker, there are plenty of other brokers. Go and talk to them. Their job is to sit there and help you and make sure that you have what you require to help. So one of the other ones is just look inwardly. If you already have cyber insurance, make sure it's suitable. And if you don't have cyber insurance, take a good look at your business and think, what would be the impact? What would be the impact of a major event? And then, as you say, talk to breach coaches, talk to other people who have experienced it, use case studies from similar competitor organizations and think, if that happened to them, it can happen to me. I suppose they would be the things that I'd take away.
Okay, I think that's a really good point. And I just wanted to add to what James said too. When you're thinking about all of these things, remember the recovery time is much longer than you think. So James said it's days, weeks, sometimes it's months. I hope it's not. But keep that in mind when crafting your incident response plans and thinking about the security protocols that you have in place, and if you need to up them so you don't experience extended timelines to recover and get back to regular business operations. And with that, I will say goodbye to everyone. James, thanks for joining me again today, and we'll see you again soon.